Hello Year 12s, this is the second screencast in a small series reviewing some of the information that I gathered at the Access Education lecture in Shepparton this weekend. So let's look just specifically at section A for this one. The first thing that Mr. Hargard said was to reread the novel this holidays. I would also suggest that if you're maybe a little bit time poor or you want to do it in a different way, you can listen to the
987 professional magicians stand out with
on
Squarespace.
YouTube.
Mouse.
It's not the
A
most
Survivor's
exciting.
By Art.
Hold on.
Haven't seen Artie in almost 2 years. We have plenty of wooden hangers.
The accents are cool. I know Miss Sando's been listening to it this way, and so have I, and I've found it quite useful, and I've been able to do that while I've been doing other mouse-related things. But if you can multitask, go for it. If you just want to sit and listen to it, that's also fine. The reason that you need to reread it is, one, yes, to re-familiarize yourself, but two, you need to develop your own understanding and interpretation of the text. This is what will separate you from other students. You need to be able to pull on different parts of the text to examine them in detail or in an analytical way that allows you to build a case with different examples from across the text. But you can only have that knowledge and understanding of the whole text if you have reread it and you've taken the time to pick out some new pieces of information on your second or third read through. You also need to show a close reading of the text with a nuanced understanding of the different elements. The examiner knows the text, they've read it over and over again. You don't need to retell the story, you need to explain and analyze it. The second thing he said to be wary of is to avoid trying to boil the question or the prompt down to one single word or idea. It shouldn't just be families and relationships. It shouldn't just be the three-tiered narrative structure. It shouldn't just be art and representation. You shouldn't boil it down to that one idea. It's a combination of ideas working together. As you will remember from the VATE questions we looked at on the 2017 exam this week, there are multiple tasks multiple parts to the question. For example, Art worries that his portrayal of his father is negative. So you can talk about portrayal, you can talk about the idea of negative, yet, that idea can be unpacked. It is he who comes across as a deeply flawed person in The Complete Mouse. To what extent do you agree? And I think to what extent do you agree is a great question, and it really gives you a lot of room to move in terms of making an argument. Yes or no, yes in some instances, or no in some instances, though there are exceptions to this idea. And when we did it as a class, and I think this is what the other two did as well, but we unpacked those different parts. So we said agree, Art is a deeply flawed person. Disagree, he's not, and why. Agree, he does portray his father negatively. And then we said, yes, he does, but he needs to for a number of reasons, because he's kind of got to balance out the image that Vladek presents of himself. So it's about looking at that question and unpacking it. A recommendation I made to my class, and I know students have done it in the past, is to just take some of these questions, write them out. So get an exercise book, even one of those little small A5 ones, write the question out on the left-hand side of the page, do a bit of a brainstorm around it, lots of arrows off, thinking up all the ideas you can, the ideas and issues related to that, examples from the text, etc. And on the opposite page, you need to then unpack and write out 3 kind of topic sentences with some evidence and whatnot included, so that you have a bit of a plan. And then you can move on to another question. You can do that for quite a few questions without writing full responses. But across those unpackings, you need to be constantly picking up your novel mouse and looking at different examples to help you make your point, because that will allow you to get really familiar with the text again as well in a critical way, and be able to manipulate evidence in a number of different ways to answer a number of different questions. All right. Don't regurgitate an essay that you did on your SAC or in exam preparation. As Mr. Haggard said, these people are experienced examiners. They know that that's the exam from last year that you're just rewriting a response to and trying to make it fit in the introduction and conclusion, but the body of the essay is off on a whole different tangent. You need to be confident enough to be able to manipulate your ideas on exam day and say, I can talk about this to answer that part of the question. I can talk about this to answer that part of the question. I can talk about this to answer the third part of the question, or whatever it is. But you need to have a lot of ideas at your disposal. That doesn't mean that you can't use paragraph banks and things like that to help you practice, but that's about building your flexibility, not about regurgitating. Know the text well and adapt your ideas to the chosen prompt. So that's just carrying on from that point before. He showed a couple of examples of introductions today, particularly strong ones that he said were sharp and had a clear contention with their arguments clearly identified, as opposed to waffly ones that weren't very sophisticated in terms of their language choices, saying things like it was good or bad or she did this or he did that, when you really need to be quite punchy and to the point about what's going on in the text and what it's trying to achieve. He also made the point that in the section A, introduction, it does not need to be an extensive introduction. Get to your point, get to it quickly, and then move on. And they want to see the analysis depth in the body, in your body paragraphs. Your section B introduction will need to be longer given the complexity of the two texts and trying to compare them. You need to set that up a bit more. But in this case, he said it doesn't need to be extensive. He said make it short, sharp, to the point, clearly address the contention and identify your arguments. Your quotes should be crisp and succinct. So they should naturally flow as part of your sentences and should be taken from key moments in the text. And he talked about turning points, significant moments with style, structure, narrative, image, etc. So for example, with Mouse, you might be thinking about the moment in which Artie realizes that Vladek has burned his mother's diaries. You could talk about the prisoner on Hell Planet as a turning point in the audience's understanding of or feelings towards Artie, because I think we have a real change there. We develop a bit of sympathy for him and a bit more of an appreciation for his personal struggle. And you could link that to the preface, the first bit at the start from Regio Park in the 1950s, where his father compares his friendship dilemma to Vladek's own experiences in the Holocaust. And those two moments really act to create a feeling towards Artie that might not have happened had those two external parts of the story been added, because they don't really form necessarily part of the narrative that Vladek is telling, but they're nonetheless important. So they're just two moments, and you need to pick some very key quotes out of there. So you don't want to have that whole lengthy quote about friends, these are your friends, da-da-da, that's about 4 lines long. Pick the best part and stick with it. I've talked about this, and I know the other teachers will have, but you need to use ellipses or square brackets to alter your quote to make sure it fits. So for example, if it says the personal pronoun I in it, but you need to make it say he or him or she or they, then you can insert that with square brackets and take out the I. If you only need the start and the end of the quote, then you use an ellipses to cut out the bit in the middle that you don't need. In order to remember these, you want to try and learn about 20. For Mouse, you should also include quotes or points about discussion of your panels, symbolism and the structural elements, etc. It won't just be the actual words that are on the page, it will be more than that. But how can you learn these? You can make cue cards, get mum and dad to quiz you on them. You might have, even on your cue cards, stuck panels from the book. So, for example, let's go. Oh, no, that's not what we want. Here we go. All right, so you might grab maybe this section, and maybe you want just one part, and maybe you want this section here, these 2 panels, and maybe they're on one of your study cards, and you're talking about the fact that they're in the car, what the car is symbolic of, who's part of this conversation, why people are drawn as different animals, the anthropomorphization of them, etc. So it doesn't just have to be that you put quotes on cue cards. You can be actual physical pictures in the case of mouse. Alternatively, Mr. Huggard talked about his son using a mind map where he put the quotes, but then off each quote there was comments about the information that was related to it, what theme was connected to it, how it could be used. And these were only very brief comments, but lots of them. And I think he said, it could be stuck on the toilet door, you could have it in your book, or just somewhere you're going to see it regularly, or you could add to it. Finally, he also suggested you could use maybe your phone and record yourself saying some of the quotes and then play them back to yourself. It might be on the bus, it might be while you're out walking, whatever it is, while you're on the bike, etc. You can record yourself saying and play them back. He said, don't forget to consider how the form impacts the reader and purpose. So we have all talked about this, but I think it's something you need to remember to come back to, and that is how the idea of the graphic novel, whether it's kind of serious enough for a Holocaust piece of literature, how the images are intended to or can impact the reader, how they work to create emotions like sympathy or frustration with maybe Vladek and his behavior or anything like that. What's the relationship between that form and the reader is something to consider. It's about quality, it's not about quantity. Do not write everything you know about every panel of text that you have looked at for the entire year. The examiner doesn't care about that. They want to know that you can form a cohesive and coherent argument that logically addresses the question and covers a number of elements of the text and ideas and themes from across the text. You need to resolve whatever it is in the introduction that was brought forward, whether that be this idea here that Art worries that his betrayal of his father is negative, yet it is he who comes across as deeply flawed. You need to resolve whether that is true or false and how it is true or false by the end of the essay. So you need to be working towards that conclusion. And each topic sentence should be building on that idea of, yes, he is a deeply flawed person. However, that is a reality. We're all flawed people. He's complex and imperfect, and that's what this book is about, showing that he is that way. And then you might say it's also through his writing and his narration and his images, he portrays, which depicts, any other synonyms you like, a really negative image of his father, and you will need to unpack what that negative image is here, and we've got some ideas there. And then you could talk about why he does that and whether that's kind of acceptable, whether he has to do it for a particular reason. Maybe he portrays him as negative because he feels he needs to overcome the heroic image that everybody sees of Vladek in the pre-war years. And that's an image that Artie can never substantiate or match up with anything else because his mother's diaries have been destroyed. So it's about really going through the complexity of the question and coming to a conclusion at the end. All right, some comments he made about editing. So he said, when you're reviewing your drafts, you should be able to read your introduction, just the topic sentence of each paragraph, and the conclusion. And he said that should logically make sense. It should start with whatever the issue is, and you should resolve it by the end. If you can't do that, automatically you can see that you are going to need you need to work on your topic sentences, your introduction, or your conclusion. You can do that before you even hand it to a teacher, because if that doesn't make sense, you need to figure out how to make it make sense. Ask your teacher for feedback. So if you're getting a 6 and you think you've busted your butt and you should have got more than that, then figure out what you need to do to get a 7, 8, maybe even a 10. And make targeted improvement choices with each rewrite or each new timed practice. So if you're working on your embedding of evidence, then really make sure when you edit yourself that you go back and check that you've done that. If you're working on building up your meta language, so the language that you use to analyze the text, then have a list beside you and try to implement a few new terms, across each essay, so that you're becoming more comfortable and more confident in using them seamlessly in your writing, and then it becomes easy when you get to the exam. Finally, he gave some practice questions. So, Spiegelman reveals the ways in which the horrors experienced in one generation to continue to impact upon the next one. I think that's a great question, and I would have a go at writing a practice one on that, or even just writing a plan like we talked about. And then life equals winning, so death equals losing. That's a quote. What ultimately does the complete mouse suggest about survival? So yes, survival is the key idea, but you have to unpack the complexity of this point. Does life mean that you have won? Just because Vladek is still alive, is he a winner, or is he suffering some consequences for that? And is it good that he's still alive, or, has that worked out for him? And just because Anya is dead or Rashu is dead, does that mean that they've lost? Or what does that actually mean? Does it mean that life's too difficult, that the consequences of the Holocaust are too hard, that, I don't know. There are plenty of ideas, and I don't want to go into too much detail on that right now. But have a chat with your teacher or your class or another classmate and unpack that question. All right, that's it for section A. I'll leave you to it.